lucky rains here in May.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the CommStock Channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you, and today I have with me the president of CommStock Investments. Wait, it's not a Tuesday, it's a Thursday, but we have Matthew Kruse, the president of CommStock. Hey, Matthew, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Yeah, the week's moving fast. I'm losing track too. So
Part of the reason that I didn't have a chance to talk with Matthew on a Tuesday like we normally do, he was kind of a busy camper. It's been planting season, in case nobody caught on to that. And it's been pretty hectic out there. How did you get along on your corn and soybean planting before the rains came in?
we're done already. So we're kind of we got after it. I wasn't too sure. We actually got most of it done here. Last about a week ago already on the 23rd, and which is I think good time to get in. Not that I think up through early May is still just fine, but yeah, we had some started raining on Thursday, and it's still pretty soggy in large portions of Iowa. I kind of drove up there here a couple days ago, and there's some standing water in some of the fields in central Iowa. It looked like most of central Iowa was done already. I think it's the northern half of Iowa has a long ways to go yet, but I was surprised. It was still pretty soggy up there. I think yesterday, just when it gets to the point when it dries out, you can start going again. Then you get another little rain, and so I think yesterday they were probably starting to go, and then tonight here, early this morning, we probably got a quarter inch again, and so we'll be stopped for a little while. But I think that's it for a little while. Then we, looks like it's going to start to dry out here at least for a while. So I still think there's plenty of time for the planters to roll, and probably didn't make as much progress this week as they would have liked, and you'll probably see that in the planning progress reports. But I think starting next week, you'll see things move along quite a bit.
Looking at a chart here of the percent corn planted here, this is a look at the annual averages. Where do you think we are right now?
What I was trying to show with this graph is, what percent of the crop is planted by the 20th week of the year. And It, obviously from year to year, it depends a little bit, but for this year, it would be around May 17th. And you can kind of see here, there is a little bit of a correlation where obviously the more that is planted, the higher the yield is as a general statement. It's not always the case, but you can kind of see there in 2019, they didn't, as of that 20th week, if you remember, that was, I think, a really wet year. Everything got pushed back, and prices rallied there in spring planting. They didn't have half the crop in by that week 20. And the yields reflect that they were down sharply. You look at 2021, they had 90% planted there by week 20. And, at that time, it made a new record yield at 176.7, which was a record average yield at that time. And so, I can remember giving an Ag Outlook last year and pointing this out that, we had 70% planted on that week 20. And, based off of that metric, it was going to be tough to be able to argue that USDA yield that they have 181.5. And as time went on, now we know that was true, that it was a little bit less than that, 179.3. So, it's still a little early yet. I guess we got to get through week 20, but that's just something that we look at that would kind of give us some indication. I think a lot of people would tell you as well that just on the fact that they're calling for more corn acres above and beyond what they came with in the prospective plantings report, planting all these fringe acres, that it tends to, make it difficult to hit those trend line yields when you're bringing in a lot more of those, marginal acres. And so, you very well could see another 500,000, 1 million acres in corn yet. When we get to the June report, I don't know that the USDA will reduce their yield objective, but they probably should. And so you're probably looking more at like closer to 96 million corn acres, but with a more modest yield of 179, something like that.
Wow, you made tremendous progress in getting your crops in the ground so fast. But reading between the lines here, and I'm trying to make sure I understand what you're saying. You guys are basically done, but some areas of Iowa haven't even started yet?
Well, no, I think everybody's started. In central Iowa, from what I saw driving around, it looked like most everything was done, and that's probably the case in southern Iowa. But northern half of Iowa, they got a long ways to go yet. But yeah, I think a lot of people got started early. I think the temperatures warmed up. Soil temperatures were, for the most part, at or very close to 50 degrees by that April 10th date. And I had said that, if we get good enough soil temperatures warmed up by April 10th, I think people are going to go. And I think that's what happened in a lot of cases. But they've been fighting some scattered rains here. That's kind of slowed them up a little bit. Yeah, at least in our area, I can't speak for everywhere, but Northwest Iowa, there's probably a little bit of PTSD where, last year, if you didn't get your crop in by April 25th, like you didn't finish until early June. And so we had two crops that we talked about last year. The one planted in April, the one planted in June, and so I think everybody's that's still fresh in their minds. So they're kind of scrambling to get the crop in as quickly as possible.
What do you hear about west of you in the Dakotas? Are they having pretty good progress? I know they were worried about the ground being too cold for a while.
We actually talked to one of our brokers who's out in western Nebraska yesterday, and he was saying they hadn't started at all, and it was still too cold and also too dry. I mean, you look at the rainfall charts; they haven't gotten much of anything, and it doesn't look like it's going to improve too much here, at least for large portions of Nebraska. And that kind of filters into the very western edge of Iowa and on into the southern part of South Dakota a little bit. And so, but yeah, you don't got to go too far south there in parts of Kansas, especially the eastern side of Kansas. I mean, they get really good rains. So it's going to vary quite a bit. But I think a lot of the eastern Corn Belt is pretty wet, and they've been fighting those rains. So I haven't made a lot of progress. But I think here I was looking out into the first half of May, and everything shifts drier. And so I think there's still plenty of time to get the crop in on time.
For the next, I guess, 7 days or next week or so, I mean, it looks like it's just pretty darn wet down here in the southern plains, not the high plains, but the southern and southeastern plains here. They're talking another maybe 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, something like that down there. It goes up into Missouri. But in the Dakotas, as you mentioned, they are going to have a streak of pretty active moisture there for a while. But then you were talking about the longer range forecast, and that looks a little bleak, doesn't it, in the Dakotas?
Yeah, it's still, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, they're getting all the rain there, and it just kind of seems to lean drier a little bit in other areas. The further you go out, we got another little bit longer term weather anomaly chart there to mid-May, I think, or late May maybe. This goes to May 27th. This is basically the weather forecast for the month of May. And here we are, May 1st, and you can still see it's pretty wet. So they're still calling for above average rain there in those southern plains area, which are already extremely wet. So there probably might be some flooding in those areas, but you can see that eastern Corn Belt is going to lean dry. Now, it doesn't mean, they still could get enough. I'm not saying there's going to be a drought or anything, but, a lot of those areas average 3 or 4 inches in the month of May usually. So if they're, half an inch or an inch below average, which is what this is kind of suggesting, that's not the end of the world. But, same situation there. And it looks like in Carroll, Iowa, kind of that west central region of Iowa is kind of epicenter for dryness there. In the case of Iowa, it encompasses a good part of that state on into Nebraska. And so, I mean, we on one hand, it's going to help facilitate the planning and the field work, things like that, which I guess is good, but eventually you're going to get in need of rain. Now, obviously it's I think we've had some decent soil profile moisture. So, I don't know that it's any great concern at this point, but, obviously as the crop progresses and you get into the month of July, it gets hotter and those moisture demands increase, but you're still going to need some moisture, I think, to get the crop out of the ground here in the early part of May.
Boy, here in the Western Corn Belt, that looks like just the polar opposite of what we had last year at this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those eastern part of Iowa, I mean, they continue to get pretty average rainfall, solid rainfall. It looks like, and they had great rainfall last year. So, yeah, it's just the western side continues to run dry, and however you look to the northern grain belt up there in northern Minnesota and North Dakota, I mean, they're getting some solid rainfall up there too, and so it's just all kind of scattered around, I guess. So we'll have to see there's always the haves and the have-nots every year, isn't there?
Should be good for at least part of the spring wheat area anyway for
Yep.
this year, right? Well, let's take a look a little further on. Let's go to South America here and get updated there. I know usually every week we talk about that. Right now, is soybean harvest done across the continent, or is Argentina still at it?
And Argentina's probably still got a little bit ways to go. Brazil's pretty much done, and they probably have been. It seems like they get to April and they're 90% done, and then it takes them 6 weeks to do that last 10%. But so on the soybean harvest, yeah, that crop is pretty much all harvested and put in the bin already or exported. In the case of the corn, that's what that crop is pretty much made as well. I mean, we've talked for a while how they need good rainfall throughout the month of April, and they've gotten it. And so I think everybody's kind of been slowly increasing their corn yield estimates for South America and for Brazil, as have we. USDA started out, I felt like, a little bit high at 126 million metric tons, but then as the year progressed, I think that they got such good rainfall that I think that they're probably going to end up right on the money. To be honest, but just because the season and the weather ended that way. But here we are looking out into this weekend, and you can still see for greater portions of Mato Grosso, they're going to get 1 to 2 inches in large areas. And I talked to one farmer down there the other day that last week that said they're going to be starting harvest here pretty soon already on some of their stuff that they planted, at the start of the year. Now there's some areas that are going to turn dry here. It looks like in Paraná. Paraná is the second largest safrinha corn production state. But I don't know. It's kind of that time of the year where the rainy season slows down. It already starts to slow down in April. They get 3 or 4 inches in April, which, it sounds like a normal amount, but that's like, they usually get 8 to 10 inches in a lot of months down there. So it's already slowing down in April. Then it'll pretty much shut off in the month of May. Like they get an inch, or less in the month of May a lot of times. And so, it's that period of time. Now, the more, if they get some other lucky rains here in May, it could still help improve the corn yields, but it's not something that you can really bank on, getting solid rainfall in the month of May. It's kind of at that point where the rainy season drifts away and the dry season starts to take over.
Wouldn't a lot of that corn now be in the tasseling stage on that safrinha corn?
Oh yeah. It's in all different phases, right? I mean, there might, some of the early get-goers have planted some of that stuff at Christmas already. They plant a short season soybean variety, they plant at Christmas, and so there's people starting to get ready to harvest here, and the corn's drying down already, and then there's people that planted in early March, and so that crop is still in a vegetative state, very green, and the ear has not fully formed, and so they would very much need rainfall throughout the month of May yet. But now there's not many of those that did that. There's still 20% or so of the crop that gets put in late like that, but it's every year, so it's not a surprise. It's every year somebody rolls the dice and kind of plants into the early part of March.
Well, everybody wants to know what kind of impact all the tariffs are having on the ag markets out here. Any thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of things. I grabbed one chart off of Bloomberg that I thought was interesting. Sort of everyone's concerned about the recession and looking for indicators, and a lot of times they look towards the stock market, which I don't know if is a Yeah, the stock market is down. I don't know if that's a great indicator for how healthy the economy is, just because it's been so much more concentrated over the years. There's like 1/3 as many publicly traded companies as there were 30 years ago, and so a lot of companies just gone more private. And but the kind of the canary in the coal mine, one thing that we look for is shipping, and how many of these shipping containers and all that are still remain in high demand. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is ships are getting canceled, containers are getting canceled. The cost to purchase a container, which I don't do a lot of, but I do a tiny bit every year because we bring in some coffee from our farm in Brazil. And so this kind of shows you that the first quarter, for 2025 really wasn't all that bad, but you can kind of see here already that the second quarter shipping cancellations are starting to skyrocket, and don't know why. As long as these tariffs are in place, that's going to continue to, I think, go in the wrong direction. And so, if ships are being canceled, there are less deals being done. Some people might want to argue that, well, we're going to make money off of the tariffs, that it's money generated into the company. Well, not if we're canceling ships that bring things in, right? And so 10% of zero is still zero. So there's no tariff money coming in if people just can't afford to do the trade. If the demand destruction is taking place. And so that's just one thing that kind of look for. But, I've talked in the past a lot about the dollar. That's something that I think people should be cognizant of and really begin to track that as well. And the dollar has been strengthening, which I don't know if that's all bad. I usually, when the dollar strengthens, like for example, the Brazilian real will um, will kind of strengthen with it. And what happens is, when the Brazilian real strengthens, the Brazilian farmers who they're selling their soybeans, which is all dollarized, and so they get less in their local currency. Yeah, and so oddly enough, one thing is, it's interesting how one thing is related to another, kind of like the domino effect. And so if our currency is strengthening, they're going to theoretically end up getting less in their local currency, which means they're less profitable. Which, I don't know. I'm trying to find a silver lining here. Maybe it's a stretch, but if they're less profitable, they can't expand as much, and so that's the currency. Their currency has a huge impact on that. And I can remember, this is dating me a little bit, but going back to like 2005. I can remember their currency strengthened, and to the point where they weren't profitable, and they were having all these truck and farmer strikes on the highway to kind of bring notice to their cause. And that's something that they like to do. They do a lot more of down there because everything is trucked. They aren't using shipping waterways and air freight and things like that. And so I didn't really participate. I was invited. I maybe kind of regret that I didn't go to kind of support the cause, but I felt a little bit awkward joining a Brazilian farmer strike against the government when I was kind of a guest in their country at the time. Maybe I shouldn't be protesting the Brazilian government fiscal policy, but I know that people are really upset because their strengthening currency really impacted the farmers' profitability. And that could happen again because they've been, basically since COVID started, their currency has been weakening. And you might be seeing a paradigm shift where it starts to strengthen, because that 5 years, it's kind of had the wind at their back, where when it weakens, they get more in their local currency when converted from dollars. Well, the opposite of that can happen too. And we've seen that in the past. I've seen it personally. And so it made profitability very difficult. And but I don't know, maybe I'll go down, and if there's another farmer strike protest, I think maybe I'll go down and participate this year. So,
do you know how profitable they are compared to Argentinian farmers now with their new government?
Well, Argentina has gotten a lot better, especially if you look at where they were a year or two ago. I think their president was maybe he's very conservative, maybe considered a little bit eccentric, but and I'm not saying everything he's doing is great, but he's managed to get a hold on that inflation, because they had hyperinflation where it was reaching like 200% a year, and I mean you're just going to turn into another Venezuela at that point. And you see it so many times when countries reach that point, there's no going back. And I think that's what's happening is they finally got it under control, and they did it just from a lot of what tightening the belt and reducing costs. And I think even the IMF is considering lending them money again in dollars. And so it's a big deal for them. So I think I don't know that any grain farmer in the world is wildly profitable right now, but I think their situation has improved tremendously. Because they would hoard the grain, the farmers would, because they didn't make their decisions based off of the CBOT. They would make it based off of the inflation. Well, and when they had to buy something, they would time it. Well, I need to buy seed or I need to buy fertilizer, so I will sell my grain on a Tuesday and then buy the corresponding inputs on the same day. Because if you sell it and then buy the inputs next month, you might have lost 10% just on the cost inflation alone, or more, or 200%. It's nuts. But I think it's gotten a lot better. I think the farmers in Argentina are very happy with him, but not to say that they, everything's wonderful there either. They still have a lot of challenges.
I heard some stories earlier this week that some European Union officials want to come to D.C. and hammer out some sort of a trade agreement. Boy, if they could come to terms on something, wouldn't that give our tariff stance a little more leverage now?
Well, supposedly every country or most countries are calling us wanting to do a trade deal. So that's what people are looking for. They're how long has it been since Liberation Day? It hasn't quite been a month yet, has it? But and so we're waiting for more of these trade deal announcements to take place. I realize they take time, but they've given a lot of them 90-day extensions, right, to get something done. And I think that's what the market is a little skeptical, because you're talking 170 countries. You're going to make 170 deals, in 90 days, or what as of now is 60 days. And so that's what the market is skeptical about. And maybe it'll happen. A lot of them I think are pretty simple, but at the end of the day, our trade deficits, which is what they say that they're so concerned about. I mean, that's boils down to just a handful of countries, and China being the biggest. Well, China's the one that has the most impact, and so I could see how there's people might get excited about, oh, we made all these trade deals with 50 countries or 100 countries. Well, if we don't get a deal done with China, I don't know how big of an impact that's really going to make to the bottom line, just because most of our trade was done at a much higher level with China. And so I don't know that I would be more favorable on a trade deal with China, but it doesn't sound like there's much back and forth happening at that point. And I think Trump at one point has kind of publicly admonished them for not even reaching out and having any discourse. They were just kind of shrugged and like, yeah, it's tough, but I guess we're going to deal with it. So
well, it won't be long, and now we'll get a May WASDE report. Does that tend to have much of a surprise?
Well, I don't know if it's going to have any surprises. I guess in May we get our first look at the 25-26 balance sheet. That's probably the most interesting thing that I think traders will look forward to kind of get an idea what the USDA sees for the next season. I would hope or think that you'd still see an increase in demand with exports, and I think ethanol demand it continues to be strong as well. And so I think you could see there old crop stocks being bid up and kind of consuming that, but with what they're projecting going forward with the new crop, and they're still projecting a record crop, and it could still get bigger before it gets smaller. And that's that concern. How many acres are we going to plant yet? That's a big factor. And what yield are they going to use? And so Yeah, I don't know that we're going to have all the answers in the May report, but we'll start to get another idea of what the USDA is thinking.
Earlier you had alluded to the fact that you wouldn't be surprised to see the corn acreage all the way up to like 96 million acres, something like that. But it's going to be a while before USDA would even be able to confirm that, right?
Yeah, I think it's June, around the end of June. I want to say June 30th. It might not be the exact date, but yeah, the end of June. Usually they come out with that.
Could be interesting times ahead. All right. Well, Matthew, good to visit with you again. Thank you for the update, and congratulations on getting done with the planning, at least for the most part. And
At least the first planting. That's what we joke in the office. We got to
right.
get done early so we have enough time to replant a second time.
Yeah, once or twice. Yeah.
Yeah, or in some cases a third time. So,
well, let's hope not. Anyway, but thanks for the time. Wish you all the best. Matthew Kruse, president of CommStock Investments. That'll do it for this episode. Thanks again for joining us. For producer Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time here on the CommStock Channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.